she's so horrible. Anyway, we're now gonna go over to Zoom to have a conversation with friend of the show, Trita Parsi, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, Trita. Can you
Hey,
hear
how's it
me?
going?
What's
How you
going
doing?
on? Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute. His Substack is tritaparsi.substack.com. Thank you so much for coming on. We got a
Thank
lot to
you.
talk about. I'm going to fix the live production real quick because it still says Rokana here because that's the last person I interviewed.
So you put
But
your tie on for him or for me?
no, I wear the tie all the time now. It's just it's a common fixture. The more the Republicans attack me, and they're attacking me. Fox News is attacking me right now because of things I said about Lindsey Graham. Instead of eulogizing him in the way that many others have, I called him an odious warmonger of the highest order, and Fox News was so frustrated by that they chose to write a whole article on it saying, controversial radical streamer Hassan Piker. But it's funny because I think it's backfired on them. Uh, because as far as I understand, even on Facebook, people are actually saying he's right. They're agreeing with me. How do you feel about the legacy of Lindsey Graham? Let's start there. Before we get into obviously the next steps and what's going on with this memorandum of understanding turning into a memorandum of misunderstanding.
Look, to me, Graham was essentially a dying breed of hawkish Republicans who thought that there always was a military solution to whatever problem or non-problem that existed in the world. And drove the United States in an absolutely terrible direction. And at every moment, there was this effort to sabotage diplomacy from his end, belittle it, and shift things back towards some sort of a muscular, military-centric approach, which I think is ultimately has been disastrous for the world, but also very, very disastrous for the United States itself. And I do think it's fair to scrutinize his track record in the Middle East in particular, because his proximity to Israel and to the UAE, I think deserves scrutiny. Even after everyone had essentially given up, realizing it is an idiotic idea, he was still pushing to expand the Abraham Accords and make Israel the center of the region, having the Saudis normalize relations with them, throw the Palestinians even further under the bus. Remember, this is the guy who said that we should just flatten Gaza, to do to Gaza what was done by the US against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. This was, I mean, he was one of Israel's most loyal soldiers. One of the aspects of his legacy, I think, that was ironically reported on extensively in the aftermath of his untimely demise is the fact that he was a champion of this latest war, this latest military quagmire that the United States found itself in. He was the middleman between Israel and Donald Trump. Something that has been reported on and openly admitted by Benjamin Netanyahu as well. And now we're seemingly going back to war. You were a little bit more positive about the memorandum of understanding than I was. I was a little bit more skeptical about whether or not this would be implemented. How do you feel right now?
I think it's a devastating situation. I don't think it was inevitable. I think there were a lot of ambiguities in the memorandum at some point needed to be clarified. They failed to do so in the manner that they should have. I know based on conversations I had that there was a different position earlier on some of these issues, and it frankly, on the American side, and it frankly hardened. I think it's partly because there are different elements inside of this administration, some of them whose perspective is much, much closer to that of Lindsey Graham, who were against this memorandum. I personally think that as soon as the MOU was signed, Marco Rubio, that by and large has stayed out of this issue, kept his arms distance from this war, from the diplomacy, suddenly shows up, uh, meets with the GCC countries, pushes for a very harsh position, a joint statement, and then he afterwards says, tolls, fees, all of them are completely unacceptable. And by taking that position, he really narrowed the pathway to an agreement. Remember, the idea of fees, that instead of a toll, there would be some sort of environmental management fee of the strait that would be collected either by Iran and Oman. It was actually an Omani idea, collected by Iran and Oman, or collected by several of the states in the region, not just the Iranians. Actually had some support inside of the administration earlier on, but that apparently changed. And Rubio pushed for this line that narrowed the pathway. Then he flew to Lebanon, and there he negotiated or mediated this complete Lebanese surrender to the Israelis with this agreement between the two countries that has even been harshly criticized by the most ferocious Hezbollah haters inside of Lebanon as a complete sellout of the country. But perhaps from the standpoint of this conversation, most importantly, that agreement contradicted the MOU. And to me, it did appear very difficult to interpret that as something else than an effort to sabotage the MOU. So I think some of these things that have happened were not inevitable. I think there were efforts from many different sides to make it more difficult. And I think also the Iranians overreacted to a couple of these things. And then over the course of the last 3 or so weeks, I've detected that the Iranians have increasingly had become convinced that Trump was going to go to war with Iran again. And I think that also colored their decisions and the manner in which they perceived everything else that was happening. It was perceived as if it were to validate their suspicion that Trump was gearing up for another war. And I think then they made decisions based on that frankly potentially helped make that a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It turns out they were correct, though, right? I mean, there is some evidence, at least now, also the very fact that the MOU is done. Trump is saying that the war is back on. But the conversation that took place with J.D. Vance going on Michael Knowles' broadcast to openly admit that the memorandum of understanding was simply just to offer a moment of respite to the strategic oil reserves that were nearing crisis levels. Obviously, if it goes below 300 million barrels, you're reaching a red line. When there's a hard limit beneath 150 million, where the salt caverns that a lot of our strategic oil reserves are stored in could possibly collapse due to a lack of pressure. This hard limit is obviously something that the American side is paying close attention to, and we have a higher priority beyond simply managing oil and gas prices in the United States of America to ensure that the European markets do not collapse, right? So we're constantly exporting oil elsewhere. That limit has now, I guess, that crisis point has now been pushed back maybe 20 days. Is there anything different on the American side, on the American calculation this time around? Because every military analyst that I'm listening to that goes on, CBS and whatnot, keeps repeatedly saying, well, we could, take over Cargill and militarily. Well, why didn't we do that last time? If we had that capacity, that would have been tremendous leverage for the American side in the implementation of whatever kind of ceasefire negotiation. So what is different this time around? Do you think that this is just going to be tit for tat for a little bit? Where do you foresee this going?
Yeah. Hasan, let me first take a step back and address what you said that, it turned out that the Iranians were right. I'm not so sure. There was a flare-up after they shot at some ships, and the Iranians were shooting at these ships because they're very suspicious. And this, I think they may be right on, which is that the U.S. side was trying to build a southern corridor that would be outside of the control of the Iranians, that would be kept open even if a war broke out again, and by that really reduce Iran's leverage significantly. And when ships started to go through that corridor without any coordination with Iran, the Iranians saw that as a major provocation. They shot at them. The U.S. bombed Iran. The Iranians bombed back. and then they went back to the table. After that, they were actually negotiating, and I wrote about it on the Substack, a compromise that could have worked, but they never managed to get to the end of it before the Iranian funeral of the supreme leader, in which diplomacy was paused. During that pause, several more ships tried to go through, turning off their transponders. The Iranians then again shot at those ships, and this caused like a freak out by Trump, in which he really lost his temper. We saw that his reactions publicly were very harsh. He said, you can't deal with these people, they're scum, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure that all of that actually was inevitable. I think the Iranians also overreacted to some of those ships. I think there's other ways that it could have been dealt with. And I can see a different scenario that could have been reached if they had done it that way instead of what we ended up with. But to your latter question, and I think this is also very important, because you mentioned that Vance had mentioned that, the strategic reserve. And that may very well have been the plan. But if you take a look at the numbers, at the time of the beginning of the war, the strategic reserves had about 415 million barrels. It is now down to 337. And it's not recuperated just because of the MOU has been in place for 1 month. So if the plan was, hey, let's recuperate that and then go back to war, that's not what we're seeing here at all. It's not gone back to that. In fact, it means that not only that, but also the rest of the global inventory that is still very much down, leads to a scenario in which if war happens, you really need to have a plan on how to get it done very quickly, because you simply cannot afford what happened last time. The runway for the US is much shorter than what it was last time. This will lead to an economic crisis much faster than the previous war did. And the previous war kept it off because the president used the strategic reserves to kind of calm the global oil markets. So to me, when I look at it, I don't see anything that suggests to me that this time around, war will work out better. That this time around, taking the Kharg Island, for instance, actually will be functioning. It's a smart military strategy. On the contrary, the oil reserves are at a lower inventory state than they were before. You're only 16 weeks away from the midterm elections. There's no way the US has managed to stock up on interceptors. The Iranians build missiles faster than the US build interceptors, and you oftentimes need to use several more interceptors to shoot down missiles. So none of this data in any way, shape, or form suggests that the US is in a better position to strike this, to go to war at this point.
Yeah. What do you say to the analysis that the American side, the American naval assets are? I mean, we have basically functionally half of our overall naval assets in this region right now. There's air defense systems. It's very clear that America at least tried to implement some sort of scheme, even after Iran started striking at ships, because this is not the first time Iran struck ships. Iran had done so when they noticed that the Americans were trying to utilize the Omani corridor. And clearly there was an effort by the American side to try to see if they could even protect these ships at all. And that failed, right? Because the Iranian drones are virtually impossible to stop with the conventional and the anti-air defense systems that we currently have. I think that was an effort from the Iranian side to maintain their leverage, the ultimate leverage that they have, which is control over the Strait of Hormuz. And that was their interpretation of the Memorandum of Understanding as well. So do you feel like this was an attempt by the American side to try to see if they could even force the transiting of certain non-approved ships at odds with the Iranian control, to see if they could even defend these ships at all? And it was maybe a failure on that front as well?
I do think it's very fair to say that this was certainly an American attempt. I think the US side would say, look, we never accepted that Iran would have control over the Omani side. So yes, it was an American attempt, but it's not a provocation. The Iranians view it as a provocation. They view it as an effort to deliberately challenge the Iranians at a time when the Iranians were in the middle of their funeral and had their attention elsewhere. And I think, frankly, that may have also led to the Iranians overreacting a little bit. But I don't think there's any doubt that the US, even before the MOU, were trying to set up this southern corridor. This is part of the reason I think Trump actually at one point threatened to bomb Oman, because it is Oman's waters, but the Omanis were not in on this. The Omanis actually were the ones who were talking about a joint management system. And this really ticked off the US side, particularly the more hawkish elements in it. And I remember when Trump made that threat, it sounded as if perhaps he misspoke, that he was going to say Iran instead he said Oman. I mean, at one point he did call it the Islamic Republic of Japan, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that he misspoke. But it appears actually that he didn't misspeak, that it actually was a direct threat at the Omanis, and it was because the Omanis were trying to find a compromise. And the US side was like, no, we don't want to do anything that allows for a compromise before at least we have exhausted the opportunity to see, can we create an alternative corridor that the Iranians cannot control, short of going to war with Oman itself.
So now the Trump administration has unveiled their second blockade once again. Earlier this morning, Donald Trump truthed on Truth Social that there would be a secondary blockade on the Gulf of Oman beyond the Iranian one, just as they had implemented one prior, and that there would be a 20% toll. Do you feel like this legitimizes the Iranian toll, ironically enough, because now all of a sudden people are going to be more comfortable with the idea of a toll for all ships that transit through the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranian one, as the foreign minister Arakshi correctly pointed to, is only 2%, which is far more manageable, far more reasonable than the 20% that Donald Trump wants?
Yeah. I don't know if he mentioned 2% in his tweet. I did a calculation. It would land at 1 to 2% because they were going to charge roughly $1 million per ship, which would amount to roughly 1 to 2% added cost to any tanker going through the straits, which still, compared to what the Turks are charging in Bosphorus, for instance, is a little bit higher, but nevertheless, 20%. I mean, frankly, Trump is not only validating the Iranian position inadvertently, he is also making the Iranian position or the Iranian plan rather attractive because it is much, much cheaper. And this is combined with other messages that he sent that everything in Iran is going to be owned by the US. I think he's going back to these fantasies that he had early on in February, in which he thought that what he did in Venezuela can be replicated in Iran. And I think it's coming from that position of deep, deep frustration that things are frankly not going in his way. And I think one of the things the Iranians have tried to figure out Trump's psychology and use psychologists when it comes to writing messages to him to make sure that they kind of got a better response from him. One thing I think they missed is that he has this need for constant positive reinforcement. He needs a diplomacy to constantly produce an assembly line of good news. And if it doesn't, he just kind of gets frustrated and then can do a 180 and go back towards war. And I'm sure after a while, he's going to get frustrated with the war and try to go back to diplomacy. But it's just not the way that you can do diplomacy between two countries that have defined each other as enemies for 47 years.
Also, on top of that, the conflict is yielding tremendous volatility in the global energy markets, and is slated to hit a hard limit where this global commodity that is necessary for survival, necessary for the grids to continue, for commodities to continue to be produced in the Asian markets, that'll then create an inflationary crisis in the United States. That's what's at stake here. The stakes are unbelievably high. So one of the other questions I had for you also is Saudi Arabia, which seemingly has decided to become more active in this conflict for some weird reason, out of nowhere, out of left field. There was a bombing of the airport, an airport runway in Sanaa that the Houthis have now responded to. There's talks about potentially closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait as well. What do you think about that? Why is Saudi Arabia getting more active in this conflict? And where do you see that going?
So I don't think it's clear yet that is exactly what the Saudis are trying to do. I think it's important to keep in mind there is a UN Security Council resolution which, I don't know if it was the right resolution, but nevertheless, to have a blockade of the Houthi controlled territories. And once the Iranians and the Saudis normalized relations and both of them kind of backed off and the war against the Houthis more or less died down, nevertheless, that resolution remains in place. And the Saudis have been insistent on making sure that the Houthis cannot reconstitute an open logistical transit route to the Iranians by air. The Iranians appear to have tried to challenge that during the funeral because they sent a plane to Sana'a to pick up Houthi officials to go to the funeral. The Saudis tried to stop that, but they failed. But now when that plane is coming back, they're trying to they're trying to make something to make sure that this is not a new normalized relation. So I think that is the root of this, but it is taking place in the context of this larger conflict. And as a result, has a significant risk, even if that is not the intent of it, to spill over into that. And that could, as you mentioned, lead to the closing of the strait in the Red Sea as well. And if that were to happen, that is a major, major escalation. My own suspicion is the Iranians do not want to see that happen until there is a major escalation by the US, and then this would be the response to it, rather than them doing it preemptively and by that justifying further escalation by the United States. So far we've seen talk about it. We've not seen any real measures that they're doing it.
I guess the $1 million question or the $1 trillion question is, where do we go from here? If America is going back to striking Iran and trying to somehow gain some kind of leverage that they failed to do so in the last 130-day operation, what do they think they can get out of it when on the strategic oil reserve side they have even less runway? What the hell is going on? I mean, it's clear that the war of attrition is more beneficial for Iran than it is for the United States of America. Obviously, they're suffering as well if there's a blockade. Their economy is in tatters, certainly, but at the end of the day, they're used to a level of sanctions regardless. They've built some semblance of resilience regardless, and therefore they're better positioned overall as they were during Operation Epic Fury. Where do we go from here? Why is America doing this again? Also, how much involvement does Israel have in this second destabilization operation that destroyed the Memorandum of Understanding?
So on your first question, I have a piece in Responsible Statecraft about this. Now we're going to add a paragraph mentioning that sheer stupidity is not included in any major IR theory, but it actually deserves a significant role because so much of what is done is decisions that are really not based on any clear wisdom and is more in the imbecile category. To me, this is just plain out stupid for the very same reasons that you said. I do not, unless, again, there is some sort of a conclusion that there is another military option that can wrap this up in less than a week or two.
They haven't deployed. That they've just weirdly enough, out of the kindness of their hearts, did not deploy against their foreign adversary of 47 years.
Exactly. And certainly not in the previous just couple of months. So I'm extremely skeptical. And as a result, I do think that this is, at best, it's going to lead, and this is really at best, if we're lucky, there will be a return to the table. Facts on the ground will not have changed dramatically in either direction. The only thing that will have changed is that the lure of thinking that through military action, you can reorganize the situation in a manner that gives you the benefit at the negotiating table, that lure essentially has been eliminated more or less. That's the only thing I can see. That would be the best case scenario because I don't believe that this is going to give any major change. In fact, I think it's going to be very difficult to get back to the table after this. The Iranians are increasingly convinced that even if Trump has an intent for a deal, he does not have the capacity to actually strike a deal. And the American political system does not have the quality left in it to sustain a deal once there is a different administration in place. This is a concern they already had during Biden. They were worried that they would be giving up their leverage, and then Trump would come back in and would uproot that agreement. And now I think it's become even further. Let me give you an example. As one of the first measures they did in this round of escalation is that general license that had been granted to the Iranians to sell their oil, because the US itself needed more oil on the market and needed to push down oil prices. They rescinded it. Now, I can understand that as part of the escalation, this is probably one of the less violent measures that could be done. But what it does is that it tells you that the longevity and the stability of such a waiver is so fragile that it loses its potency at the negotiating table as a bargaining chip. Because for it to be valuable to the Iranians, it needs to be stable, because they already have difficulties getting new purchasers of their oil, because most countries like, well, we don't know if the US is going to stick to this deal, so we don't want to start, binding ourselves to some long-term contract with you for oil delivery if the US is just going to flip in a week. And then it flipped within a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So now next time when the US goes to the table and say, hey, we'll grant you an oil waiver, the value of that bargaining chip is going to be far less than it was last time, because it's been proven again to be so flimsy, so easily revoked.
Yeah. There's also obviously the confidence that they have in Americans following on their commitments, which clearly, time and time again, perfidy is deployed with regular frequency. So there's no confidence whatsoever. This obviously probably gives them a lot more legitimacy to the hardliners. On the Iranian side, they have been, fairly cohesive throughout this process, and yet, if I'm a hardliner, I'm looking at the situation and going, I mean, what do you want? We achieved negotiations through battle. We fought and we bled for this additional leverage that we gained, and now America's proven once again that the only way out of this is to fight. So I don't know what internal leverage the reformers of the more moderate factions have at this point, given that America's shown time and time again that they're not remotely interested in a serious negotiations process. How do you foresee that going? That power grab internally in Iran?
So, I think we're already seeing that. They're increasingly concluding that the US was intending to go to war from the outset. I personally don't think that is necessarily correct, but that is what they're seeing. And I think the Iranians going forward are going to be even more difficult to deal with, because, again, for them now to be able to muster the type of consensus that is needed in their system to be able to sign an agreement, to come to a yes, is going to become even more difficult than it was before. This is one of those things also, and I've mentioned this publicly before, that I had told the administration prior to the war that they're really kind of miscalculating the Iranians. It's not about them being ideological or courageous, but I just don't see the system being capable of surrendering. And the reason for that is that they need to get to a consensus to surrender. And that consensus is just impossible for them to achieve. There will always be some faction, probably not a weak faction, that would refuse to do so. And as a result, as Trump was constantly looking for the Iranians to surrender, he just completely miscalculated. He didn't understand their thinking, but also didn't understand their system. And that, but to a less intense extent, is also going to be the case when it comes to an agreement going forward. We saw that back in the JCPOA. It was a hell of a fight to get that system to come to an agreement for the JCPOA. It was difficult as well to get to the MOU. And I don't know if you saw some of the images of how hardliners were harassing the foreign minister and others during the funeral, accusing them of being compromisers and appeasers. The very same language and narratives and discourse that we see in Washington, in which diplomacy is weakness, compromise is a negative word, you have it on the Iranian side as well.
I will admit,
as you mentioned, those voices are the ones that are strengthened by these episodes.
Yeah, they have more. Iran currently has more real popular mobilization and support for continuing the war on military terms than the United States does. Like there's no American rallies taking place in the United States of America. The only people that are hardliners in the same way that like the Iranian hardliners are Israelis for the most part.
Yeah.
That's
or,
it.
or they're in the Beltway.
Yeah.
People in the Beltway who live off of this stuff.
But there is no like mass mobilization demanding that Donald Trump continue waging this war, especially because Americans, well, we're very selfish people, and the only impact that we have that we care about is gas prices, and everyone is noticing that the gas prices are going up.
Yeah. But the flip side of that, Hassan, is also very important. And frankly, something that I'm disappointed in. But I think it goes back to exactly what you said, which is the gas prices, which is yes, but also there's not been the type of mass mobilization that I think was needed to push back against this war. So you don't have people protesting in mass numbers in American streets against the war either. And I think part of the reason why that is not happening is because the administration has used the strategic reserves to keep oil gas prices artificially low in order to avoid that scenario.
And there's no ground troops. There's no ground troops mobilization.
Once you get to a ground troop scenario and you have a larger number of Americans coming home in coffins, then it's just a ticking time bomb before those type of protests will happen. But this is the problem with America's wars in general. The American public in general tends to be against these wars. But by keeping the wars as distant as possible from the public and making sure that the consequences are as minimal or as spread out as possible. And you saw that during the Obama administration. They didn't want to have body bags, so they went over to this kind of drone warfare, which caused massive amount of civilian casualties, but it made sure that the risk of American soldiers getting killed were really minimized. And they got away with doing the war, continuing all these wars, but doing it that way because it shielded the public from the costs. And the administration has taken similar measures with this war as well to keep the costs low.
Yeah. I know we have a limited amount of time. I just wanted to ask you one final question before we let you go. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Section 219, formerly Section 224 of the House Fiscal Year 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, is establishing that the United States and Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. Now, of course, you're very familiar with this. Responsible Statecraft has written extensively on it. For those in my audience that might not know, it directs the Department of Defense to appoint an executive agent to accelerate joint research, development, and integration of Israeli and U.S. defense technologies. In layman's terms, this is a merger between the Israeli military and the United States military. The provision focuses on sensitive modern military domains, including artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, quantum computing, yada, yada, yada. It would make it virtually impossible to even utilize the existing mechanisms, the existing legal framework to hold Israel to account for its genocide, to restrain Israel in any meaningful capacity, or to deny Israel any military aid and arms embargo and the like. Where do you think this is going? There's a lot of debate around it, and what do you foresee happening here with this cooperative agreement?
Yeah. So look, this is a crucial issue, and I think this is the reaction of the pro-Israel, the pro-Likud groups in Washington, as well as the Israeli government, to the fact, and you're one of the leading voices of that, the American public, particularly younger Americans, are waking up to the very negative aspects of the U.S.-Israeli relations. They're turning against it, and it has translated into serious bills in the Senate to end funding, not just defensive, but all funding of the Israeli military. And this is frankly a very clever maneuver by them to actually take that and then embed in Israel inside of the American military and the Pentagon budget and make it a bureaucratic exercise, not something that has oversight by Congress, not something that Congress has to vote on every X amount of years, etc. This allows the money not only to go up, but it allows the money to be hidden from the American public.
Yeah.
And this is their reaction to recognizing they are losing the American public. Now, whether it will succeed or not, I haven't followed the latest things. There are other people at Quincy In fact, Steve Simon is the one who wrote the first piece on this and really in detail explained what the Israelis were doing on this. Who would be in a much better position to say where the status is. But I can tell you, if it passes, it means that essentially this very, in my view, negative relationship between the United States and Israel, the one that is based on this carte blanche, the one that is based on essentially just allowing the Israelis to do whatever they want, will be given another and a very major new lease on life.
Yeah, this I think is a direct response to the growing demands to decouple America from Israel. It would make it much easier for Israel to simply turn around and say, okay, we're not getting any more military aid from the United States of America, and turn the relationship de facto into the similar structure that already exists for jet fuel, for example. Many people would not know this, but like the American government sends Israel jet fuel as a part of its Pentagon budget, and it's not above it's not an above board expenditure that would be written about as military aid to Israel. So this would turn every part of our security cooperative relationship into this opaque structure that is not is much more difficult to identify and much more difficult to restrain. A terrifying bill, and you know, a new version of the depravity that I have grown to expect from the American government and certainly the Israeli one. Trita, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Hassan.
What do you want to promote before we let you go? You got your Substack?
Yeah, so my Substack is just tritaparsi.substack.com. You can follow me on Twitter at tparsi, and also, of course, the Quincy Institute's website, quincyinst.org, or Responsible Statecrafts magazine, which is responsiblestatecraft.org.
All right. Thank you so much, Trita,
Thanks
for
so much.
coming on,
Appreciate
as
it.
always. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. That was Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute. I did not ask him about Ahmadinejad. I forgot to ask him about Ahmadinejad, but I feel like that's, you know, it's whatever. Ahmadinejad being a Mossad asset who escaped the Mossad asset status is really funny. Anyway, getting back to U.S. and Iran both claiming Hormuz control as strikes escalate and traffic plummets.
There's escalating attacks between the United States and Iran as the
Trita, once again, ironically enough, as you know, someone who worked in NIAC, is far more pro-America than I am, and every time we have a conversation, it almost comes across as like I'm more pro-Iran than he is, and I guess there is some truth to that, but you know, let's continue.
The control of the Strait of Hormuz continues and intensifies. There's a new analysis from CNN showing that the frequency of U.S. strikes, it is increasing and hitting deeper inside the country than before. Oil prices are on the rise after the fresh attacks for a second straight night. U.S. Central Command says it hit dozens of targets, part of its push to try to get Iran to stop attacking commercial ships in the strait. Iran today is saying that it is going after U.S. military targets, claiming it hit a U.S. base in Bahrain. CNN has not been able to independently verify those reports. But Tehran is also vowing to not stop and promising to keep up strikes on U.S. allies in the region. Yes, raising the question once again of what ceasefire. CNN's Betsy Klein, live from the White House with the very latest on this. Betsy, what are you hearing from there this morning? I mean, I think it's a big question of like, does this continue to intensify now for a third day?
Well, what is very clear right now is that this moment is posing a major test for that memorandum of understanding signed just about a month ago. But what's not clear is how and if this is going to get resolved. President Trump said last week that the ceasefire was essentially over, but he did say at the same time that negotiations toward a diplomatic solution would continue. Since then, we have just seen a steady escalation in this conflict. At the root of this issue here is the Strait of Hormuz, that critical critical oil thoroughfare. And prior to this conflict, no one had full authority or control over that strait. Now, it has become a key point of leverage for Iran since then. Iran says that they control the Strait of Hormuz, they control this waterway, and that they've been launching attacks on commercial vessels in recent days. They say that the passage of ships is not possible without their permission. Now, the U.S. position, according to CENTCOM, is the following, quote, Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz. It remains an international waterway. U.S. forces are positioned and prepared to keep it that way. Now, we saw overnight, Saturday into Sunday, as the U.S. launched strikes on dozens of Iranian military targets after they say that Iran targeted one of those commercial shipping vessels. Then the U.S. launching another round of strikes overnight, both aerial and sea drones. Now, Iran has subsequently retaliated with attacks on U.S. military bases in Gulf countries. But as we think about a path forward, the White House view here is that there is a division amongst Iranian leadership. There are the moderates who believe that there should be a diplomatic path forward, and there are the hardliners which say that Iran shouldn't have agreed to this memorandum of understanding in the first place. Now, critically, oil prices are continuing to rise after a brief reprieve, up about 10 cents in the last week or so. The price of crude oil about 3% up. So the midterm elections just about 4 months away. This all weighing on President Trump as he weighs his path forward, Kate.
Yeah, some critical decisions that need to be made very soon. It's good to see you, Betsy. Thank you very much, live from the White House for us this morning. Joining me right now is CNN military analyst, retired Colonel Cedric Layton, for more on this. Colonel, what should everyone make of what happened this weekend? A weekend of strikes and counterstrikes. People seem to, as Alex Thompson was saying, it's a ceasefire that's been full of fire. But what do you make of what happened this weekend?
Yeah, good morning, Kate. Well, Alex is exactly right. It's a ceasefire by any other name is not what we're seeing here. And, you're looking at this in a way that, clearly points to an intensification of U.S. efforts to really prevent the Iranians from closing down the Strait of Hormuz. So basically what's at stake here, what we've got is a possible change in the whole precedent that you see when it comes to the law of the sea, which is you need to have open waterways that are free, from a navigation standpoint.
Yeah. You saying that to Trump, or you saying that to the IRGC, bro? Yeah. Trump, Pickaxe Mountain, an untouched nuclear facility believed to be more fortified than Isfahan, is a possible target for a nice big fast shot right into the front door. And I think that maybe you'll see that. I'll tell them right now, look, the fact is they have no Air Force. They have no Navy. I like how he says right through the front door, because he knows all they can do is fire at tunnel entrances. For context, this facility was built at least 100 meters underneath the peak of a solid granite mountain called Kuh Kolang Gazla, or Pickaxe, just south of the Natanz facility. Construction began 2 years after Trump pulled out of the JCPOA and 9 years after the GBU-57 was developed. They can't get to it. There's not even evidence that they can get to Isfahan or any number of different fucking facilities, or at least the parts that are underground. Mount Kubide. Yeah. Kubide. The skull measuring guys have reached a logical conclusion of their worldview: neoconservatism. If I'm honest, I probably would have danced on Lindsey Graham's grave 20 years ago when I defined myself as anti-war, but today I have a measured respect for him. I now understand. This is Richard Spencer. But today I have a measured respect for him. I now understand that neoconservatism is one of the handful of ideologies capable of maintaining the world order and taking responsibility for America's power. I've come to appreciate this, not so much through Trump's actions as president, as through critically examining all those anti-war geopolitical ideologies that formed on the right and among America's enemies, which I might have been sympathetic 2 years ago. Here are 2 cheers for Lindsey. You were on the wrong side of things so often, but on the right side when it mattered for Europe. You were a man. Now, Richard Spencer is saying this as a neo-Nazi, of course, is because of Lindsey Graham's work against work in Ukraine. Richard Spencer has become the average Ukraine flag in the bio liberal. It's not even a joke. And of course, Hanania, your maturity and growth are an inspiration. Yeah. It's not even a joke. These guys like Richard Spencer has talked about how Kamala Harris is the best path forward to maintain American military dominance because she'll be competent, unlike Donald Trump, who will fuck the bag up. Which, in some respects, I guess if you care about maintaining American force projection capabilities, like yes, Donald Trump has delivered a devastating blow to that. So, there is that. At a certain point, these reactionaries ultimately come back to neoconservatism through first principles, because neoconservatism is American military dominance. It's the American military dominance doctrine. So why wouldn't you be a neocon? I guess the only reason why they hated neocons is because of its association with Jews, right? That's what the other side of this is, right? Good, we don't need the ICC. We have plenty of international law at home. These guys don't believe that might makes right because they hate when the wrong people try to play by those rules. What they believe is a sort of white nationalist end of history. The winners of the 20th century have divine right, and the worst crime is not knowing your place. Yeah. But what they fail to comprehend is we are living through might makes right now. As a matter of fact, we're lucky that Iran still doesn't do the law of the jungle method. Okay? That's the other side of this story. We constantly complain that Iran is playing by this new book, okay? And it's not that they were willing to play by might makes right. It's that they were forced to play by those rules, right? They were forced into playing by those rules. They were backed into a corner. Can you imagine if China played by those rules? Please, for a brief moment, think about what the world would look like if China played by America's rules in the way that these fucking dipshits are constantly demanding. Now, these dipshits are utterly irrelevant, right? They're utterly fucking irrelevant. They're just random Twitter users. They just demonstrate a growing ideology in the American NatSec circles. But can you imagine a world where China plays by those rules? There's one country that plays by those rules. That country is Russia, right? Russia plays by those rules, and we see what that looks like in Ukraine. Can you imagine if China operated like Israel or the United States of America? There'd be war everywhere. There'd be permanent war. We wouldn't be, there'd probably be a nuclear holocaust. I like that people say, oh, China would be militarily sieging Taiwan. Dog, what are you talking about? China would be sieging Japan and South Korea. What the fuck do you mean Taiwan? They already speak Chinese over there. They'd be making the Japanese speak Chinese. They would be planting their flag in Australia. If China operated like America does, what do you mean Taiwan? Wake up. There'd be an insurgency in Hawaii and a significant attempt to do a Hawaiian separatist movement. Like the possibilities are endless. The only reason why America gets to still operate this way is because there are no foreign adversaries that are willing to fight dirty in the way that America does. And even middle powers like Iran are capable of becoming regional powers overnight when they choose to fight back with a fraction of the intensity that America brings to the rest of the world. And even then, Iran is still willing to play ball. They demonstrated that with the MOU, right? They demonstrated that. They were still willing to trust us for some fucking insane reason when we are not trustworthy people at all. We do not play by the rules. And look where look how far that got them. What are they supposed to do? This is what a lot of these fucking morons don't understand. Richard Spencer and these other fucking idiots. They don't understand this. You don't want to live in that world. You want to maintain some semblance of stability, right? Well, this is where the no rules law of the jungle takes us.
Point, and the Strait of Hormuz is a prime example of that. There are other choke points around the world, but this one is a very critical one because, as we famously talk about 20% pre-war, about 20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz on its way to its final destination. So this is a critical waterway, and it's been one that the U.S. has recognized as a critical waterway that needs to stay open for a very, very long time. And when you look at the oil price, you really see that there are, some absolute economic factors that are at play here, and they have, as we previously discussed, political implications as well as geostrategic implications.
CENTCOM also said that the U.S. used one-way attack aerial drones, one-way attack sea drones for the first time now in this war. What does that indicate to you?
Well, they've learned a lot from the Ukrainians. From one standpoint, you're looking at this, with the one-way attack aerial drones as well as the sea drones. We're moving into a different era of warfare. And that is an era of automation, an era of robotics, and of course, drones being part of that. So what we're trying to do is use as many types of weapons that we can without endangering our air crews, our sailors, and all our other military personnel. So the way that the U.S. is fighting this war is it really wants to automate this as much as possible, put as few troops as possible in danger, basically avoiding ground incursions and trying to open the strait without too much damage to our forces and too much risk in terms of casualties.
Do you think we are to a point where people need to accept that the way negotiations are going, the attacks, counterattacks, a ceasefire that is full of fire, that Iran will have some control over the Strait of Hormuz going forward that they did not have before this war? Because I'm curious what you see when you look at the military aspect of this, what more the United States can do to get them to stop using that leverage.
Yeah, barring a ground incursion and the taking over of territory on the Iranian side of the Persian Gulf, especially on the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz, it really does look like there's going to be some kind of acceptance of Iran's control, at least of the northern channel. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that that's going to happen, but it seems like we're moving in that direction. And if we do move in that direction, that could have grave economic implications for other areas, the Strait of Malacca around Singapore. You've got choke points in the South China Sea. So this is a critical area right here, and this will set a precedent for years to come.
For the globe. Colonel, it's great to see you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
An unwelcome sight right here. You can see oil prices on the rise. Pretty significant jumps overnight after the U.S. and Iran traded a new round of strikes. Iran has declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. We should note these prices are still down quite substantially from their wartime highs, but up from before the war, to be sure. Let's get to CNN senior business reporter David Goldman on all this. And they're pointing upward right now. That's the thing to remember.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the direction that we want to see. Remember, we were down close to $71 before this all started. So, you're right. We were up to $112 at the peak, but 71, now we're talking about $7. And that's why you have gas prices starting to rise, right? So 7 cents is not nothing. And we aren't even close to the $4.56 that we had at the peak, but we're still way above this $2.98. So we've got quite a ways to go to fall, and we're going in the wrong direction. So what's going on here? Well, there's a few things. The first thing that you have to remember is there's two ways in and out of the strait. One is to hug this coast around Oman, and the other is to go around the coast of Iran, and Iran really doesn't like it when you hug the Omanian coast, because that's the route that they can't charge tolls on eventually. They can't register you. They want you going in and out of the coast around their coast. So what did they do? Well, they started firing at ships. And so the CENTCOM said on Saturday, well, they've violated the terms of the Memorandum of Understanding. Remember, that's what the president negotiated about 3 weeks ago, and they are out of order. Well, okay, so what does Iran do? They said, well, the strait's closed. Then there's this change of tune, right? No, the strait is open to all vessels. Traffic is flowing. Is it? Well, not really. So we had, on a normal day, we had around 100 vessels that were transiting the strait. We were down to 21 over the weekend, and that's the entire weekend. That's not just one day. We had 0 coming into the strait. That means that all of the oil that's trying to get out, it can't go anywhere because it can't get on a ship. So what does all of this mean for Iran? Well, they're still getting their oil out, 1.3 million barrels per day. That is down from June, certainly, but it is still a lot of oil coming out of the strait for the guys that we don't want the oil coming out from.
So you can certainly see the situation is not what the United States wants, not what the United States thought or tried to negotiate the Memorandum of Understanding. Of course, Iran.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Fergie Chambers. It's a fucking insane story. It's yet another instance of government overreach, attacking. I'm gonna skip the Fox News Ro Khanna one, but and we're gonna get to Maine. ICE agent shoots and kills man in Biddeford, Maine, sparking protests. I guess before we do that. Last but not least, to button this story, the story on our strategic oil reserves. U.S. posts smallest weekly oil reserve draw since the initial rollout of 172 million barrel SPR release. The U.S. withdrew 3 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve last week, the smallest weekly draw since the release's initial ramp-up in late March. Reuters reports since early April, weekly withdrawals have ranged from 4.1 million to nearly 10 million barrels. The emergency stockpile now holds 316.5 million barrels, its lowest level since April 1983. SPR inventories have fallen by 98.9 million barrels since the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran began. The slowdown raises the possibility that Washington is moderating withdrawals to avoid spooking oil markets and preserve leverage with Iran. What is this? Twitch clip that? Okay. Some analysts have speculated that smaller SPR draw, even as far fewer vessels exit Hormuz amid a new U.S. blockade and Iranian closure of the strait, suggests that SPR may be nearing its operational minimum, the lowest inventory threshold requiring to maintain the structural integrity, pipeline pressure, and physical capacity of the system to effectively distribute crude oil. Analysts have suggested the minimum level may be around 150 to 300 million barrels. 300 is a critical line. 150 is when salt caverns start destroying itself. Structural collapse of the salt caverns. CENTCOM said this weekend that 400 million barrels of oil have crossed the Strait of Hormuz since early May, equivalent to about 20 days worth of pre-war crude flow. The war has removed over 1 billion barrels of crude oil supply from the global market since the conflict began in late February 2026. Brent crude rose nearly 10% today as of news of the oil U.S. blockade. Trump is live taking questions. All right, we'll see what the fuck he has to say. Okay, never mind. I thought we were going to move the Biddeford, Maine, but perhaps not yet.
He was a little tired, and then this whole thing happened, and it's, it's tough. So the flags are at half-mast until Saturday evening, which is an extended period of time, generally speaking, but I think he deserves it. and he's a fantastic person. He was a fantastic man. He was actually a great politician. He got along with almost everybody, and when he didn't get along, they knew it. He was tough, but he was a good man. He was very much in favor of the Save America Act. He called me about that. We were talking about that and some other things, but he just felt tired, but he felt fine. And then this horrible thing happened just a short time afterwards. So it was terrible. I just want to pay our respects.
Mr. President, you mentioned that Iran has agreed to a deal and then walked away from it. Have you reached the conclusion that a negotiated settlement won't be able to happen?
No, I never reached that conclusion, but we're hitting them very heavy tonight, as you know. We're hitting them. We have tremendous amounts of ammunition. We have numbers that we haven't had in years, and we're hitting them very hard, and it'll continue, and we'll see what happens, but we're knocking out all of their offensive capability, and we're controlling the straits. We're putting the blockade back, and it's a blockade not for anybody but Iran. In other words, anybody doing business with Iran can't go through. Everyone else will be able to go through. So it's a blockade. It's a very strong blockade. The blockade was probably more effective even than hitting them, but I think the combination is the thing that really does it.
But you think a deal is still possible? You think they'll return to the...
Yeah, I think a deal is possible, sure, I do.
Mr. President, you noted the United States is bombing Iran again. I mean, you've been bombing
He looks
Iran
like
for
shit.
months now.
He's
Is
sad
this
of
the new
Lindsay's
normal
passing.
for the American
No,
people?
well,
He
you know,
lost
we're
one of
here
his
now for 19
boyfriends.
years. We're here for 4 months. So I think we've done a lot. We've knocked out their Navy in a period of 1 month. We knocked out their Air Force. Their Air Force is non-existent. We knocked out most of their missiles, most of their drones. We knocked out their drone manufacturing capability, about 92%. Their missile capability for manufacturing, we knocked out 89%. And they have a little capability, but they don't have any capability for us. This is almost a military skirmish. Now, with all of that being said, you have to get people that want to make something. We had a deal with them 2 days ago, and then they said, oh, we can't make that deal. We have to negotiate it further. And this is what they've done for 47 years.
Have I heard that Iran has been knocked out? Oh, all day, every day. I hear it nonstop.
This should have been done by Bush and Obama and Biden and people before them, frankly. It's 47 years they've been ripping off everybody and really hurting and killing thousands of people. So they killed 52,000 protesters, but they killed many, many people with Soleimani, who I killed in the first term. Soleimani killed many people, many people, and not only killed. When you see a young former soldier walking around with no legs, no arms, a face that's been horribly, horribly hurt, that was done by Iran. That was done by Soleimani. He was a person that was very evil. He was an evil genius. He was
Father
looking
of
to
the
take out a lot of
roadside
our
bomb. He was an
military
evil
installations
genius.
in Iraq and Iran, and I got him before he got us. So we have to do what we're doing, and the strait is open. It will be open. We've cut down their capability very substantially, but they're going to fight for a while. Our military has done a fantastic job, and the bottom line, though, and I say it to everybody, and I say it as much as they want to listen, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. If we didn't bomb them with the B-2 bombers, that plane right there, if we didn't bomb them, they would have had a nuclear weapon long ago. Within 1 month from the day we bombed them, they would have had, if we didn't do it, they would have had a nuclear weapon. If they had a nuclear weapon, Israel would no longer be with us. The Middle East probably would no longer be with us, because you saw they sent missiles to 5 different countries that never even knew they were involved, because they're stone cold crazy. They are crazy. And we're not going to put it up. Yeah, I want to be reimbursed because we're protecting a very rich portion of the world. We're spending money. And so what we've done is we are going to be reimbursed for protection. We're protecting by the countries that we're helping. For instance, you look at the 5 countries. You have Saudi Arabia. You have UAE.
It's going to be really funny having Mark Rutte try to convince all the NATO countries that it's actually better to pay 20% to the United States of America than 2% to Iran.
Very well. But we think it's appropriate that we don't need them. We have more oil than any other country in the world. When you add Venezuela, which has been amazing, which has tremendous amounts of oil that we control, when you add Venezuela and everything else, we have more than 50% of the world's supply. We don't need it. but we need it from the standpoint of protecting allies, et cetera, including Israel, including Saudi Arabia, including Qatar, including UAE. We're protecting all of them, and we've done a very effective job. So 4 months ago, these people had military that was very strong, by far the strongest probably in the Middle East. They were called the bully of the Middle East. Now they don't have a navy. They have 159 ships underwater. They had a total of 159 ships. Now every one of them is underwater. They had 230 airplanes, attack planes. They're all gone. They're gone. They had tremendous radar. It's all gone. They had tremendous anti-aircraft. It's all gone. Sadly, their leadership is all gone. They had their first-tier leaders are all dead. Their second-tier leaders are all dead. Their third-tier leaders, who we're dealing with, more or less, some of them are already gone. And then you read fake news like your network, CNN, which is fake news. You read them, you have them say, well, actually, aren't they doing quite well? Let me just tell you, they have now inflation of over 300%. 4 months ago, they had inflation of 5%. Now they're at over 300, could be 350%. They made a deal, they broke it, probably 10 times. And they killed a lot of people. They killed our people. But the protesters, what they've done to the protesters, 52,000. Have you ever seen any of the burial lots where they're burying the protesters? They killed 52,000 protesters. And on my watch, they can't do any of that. So we have them in a position that they don't have any military. There's not a thing they can do about it. All they have is fake news.
I can't believe he keeps repeating
They
this.
see us lose the war, then win the war, which is really treasonous, in a certain way. So we're doing another very major attack tonight. They want to make a deal. They came back. We made a deal 2 days ago, and they want to make a deal. They've been negotiating for 47 years, but nobody's ever hit them militarily. We're hitting them very hard. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, Thank you, press. Thank you.
The number is so crazy because it just increases and decreases. Like sometimes he says 80,000, and then other times he'll say, today he's at 52,000. It's wild. Yeah, apparently he posted this video where he says democratic socialism must be criminalized, leaders must be deported. By Savage Nation, by Michael Savage. The video concludes with an explicit call to action. Criminalize democratic socialism, arrest the leaders and deport them. Save America while you still can. He'd never do that to Zoran. That's all I'm going to say. Michael Savage is still alive? Apparently, yeah. So, in Maine, another place where ICE is operating and with no authority whatsoever, but absolute intensity.